once the World War I inflation had occurred, he just thought the major powers should go back to the existing ratio, like not try to achieve pre-war parity. And the analogy he used, he said, if somebody runs over a man in a motor car, it doesn't help them to put it in reverse and go over him backwards. So that's kind of what he thought, that there'd be like a double distortion to first inflate and then try to do the deflation. Do you know? Is it just a matter of like prestige? Did the policymakers and statesmen of the day think, well, no, we have to show the public and financial sector that we're serious about our commitment to gold, and it's going to be painful?
There was definitely something of that nature going on. I think it's a little bit more complicated than just trying to restore the old gold standard as it existed in 1914. Everybody realized that there had been practically a doubling of prices during the war and the immediate post-war period. But there was still a lot of misunderstanding about the prestige element in setting the gold currency parities after the war. That was one of the issues, certainly one of the great issues in Britain in 1925 when Britain restored the gold standard. And the United States was able to restore the dollar at the old parity. The reason being that the United States, which was not belligerent in the war until 1917, had become kind of a gold sink. Not all of it. The United States was sort of the supplier of goods and material for all belligerents, and they were paying for it with their gold reserves, which were no longer being used as currency, but they were being used to settle international financial transactions. So all this gold kept pouring into the United States during World War II, and that continued in the immediate post-war period, especially when the United States began an inflationary policy shortly after restoring the gold standard. The United States had such a huge proportion of all the world's gold reserves that it basically was able to go back at the old parity. And then other countries had to decide, well, are we going to go back on the gold standard, or are we going to go back and restore the parity that we had with the United States, with the dollar, when we reestablished the gold standard. And Britain was one of the few countries that was able to do that. But in order to do that, they had to accept a lot of deflation, which caused the depression worldwide depression that already set into Britain during the 1920s. It was exacerbated after 29, of course, but Britain was in a depressed state for most of the 1920s. But other countries had to decide, are we going to go back at the old parity to the dollar, or go back to the lower parity? And that created a lot of potential for monetary mismanagement.
Okay, thanks. So then jumping ahead to like the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, is your thesis exactly identical to like Scott Sumner and the market monitors, or do you have differences? The listeners to this podcast, I've gone over his position a few times, so I think they have a general idea what his diagnosis was.
I'm sorry, I missed who you're referring to.
Scott Sumner. So he played the club market monitorists.
Right, yes.
So he was, sorry, you know what I'm talking about?
That was the reference.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I think Scott and I are very similar in our analysis of the 2008 crisis. And I think he also has written in his book, The Midas Paradox, he wrote an explanation or discussed the causes of the Great Depression, and that aligns pretty well with my thinking. Scott is also a fan of economics.
Okay, Chris, so just to understand, is it that you guys disagree with the Austrian view of there's a resource misallocation, or is it just you think, yeah, that didn't happen? That's not really the driving force in these crises?
Yeah, so I think the Austrian theory is capable of explaining a business cycle, or at least a movement of cost. It's a plausible theory of an individual event, a particular episode, a business cycle episode. I don't think, even in general, it accurately portrays the singular explanation of prosperity and depression. It's not an illogical theory. It's not, but I don't view it as being a comprehensive theory of all business cycles, particularly the Great Depression. I read Seth Rothbard. I can't say I'm an expert on Rothbard's explanation of the Great Depression, but I don't believe it's a convincing explanation when what was going on was essentially a pure deflation caused by the mismanagement of the gold standard, and everything else is more or less just side phenomena.
Okay, so let me ask you this way. Do you think, had there been proper policy decisions at the Federal Reserve, both in late 1929 and 1930, and also 2008, 2009, that unemployment didn't need to get as high as it did in both cases?
Sure. I think the Federal Reserve played an important part in the 29 episode in the crash, because the Federal Reserve was very much preoccupied with the problem, what they perceived to be the problem of excessive speculation on Wall Street, and they felt that the way to control that was to raise the interest rate. They raised it up to 6.5%, I believe, in either late 28 or early 29. And we're talking about an economy with zero inflation, possibly even a slight deflation at that time, depending on which index you're using to measure inflation. So that was totally unwarranted, but given that the United States was the linchpin of gold standard, and given everything else that was going on, particularly when the French restored gold standard, and they began accumulating gold at very rapid rates. It was a tremendous gold accumulation by the Bank of France starting in late 28 and all 29 through the entire period of the Great Depression until the Great Gold Rebound. The Great Depression is understood as an international phenomenon, not just a U.S. And the Federal Reserve policy certainly had an important role in the unfolding events starting in 29, as they were preoccupied with controlling stock. When most of the countries were paying their currency mentioning that right now in this conversation. I'm drawing an analogy between the Fed in 2000 and 1929 being preoccupied with the stock market, and in 2007, 2008 was preoccupied with the oil price war. That's probably a little bit too facile an explanation, but I think there's some truth in that.
Okay, thanks. And so partly, I wanted just to clarify that because it's ironic when I switch over. For the main reason I wanted to have David was to talk about the Schroff Hayek debate. And what's interesting is, at least for approximation, I'm taking Schroff's side, I think you're taking Hayek's side. And so it's interesting given how you might be Austrian and you're obviously not, even on the matter of business cycle theories, which is kind of what Hayek and Schroff are arguing about. So, what do you think the best way to
By the way, I read a lot of Hayek and Mises, and I have a lot of, not as big a fan of Mises, but certainly Hayek had a great influence on the development of my thinking over the years. And I think there's a lot of insight in Austrian economics. I think I differ from Austrians and believe that it's all there, and everything else is sort of not very insightful. That's maybe a fair characterization, but I think there's a little bit too much focus on what only Austrian economists have contributed, and not enough about other economists. But I share a lot of Austrians' dissatisfaction with modern way modern economics has developed over the last half century.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And yeah, that's obviously part of my work, because I know you're very knowledgeable in history and economic thought, and I respect all these different traditions. So it's rare to find somebody who can at least grapple with these topics. So let me just very quickly set the stage, and then I'll let you take this however you want to in terms of explaining your interest. So in 1932, Keynes is the editor of the Economic Journal and has Piero Sraffa read a review of Hayek's book Prices of Production, which was like a distillation of the lectures he had given at the LSE on what we would now think of as like Austrian business cycle theory. And the title, folks, by the way, just Hayek was showing how changes in relative prices could affect the structure of production, hence the title Prices of Production. And so Sraffa writes a sort of scathing critique. Hayek is given a chance to respond, he does, and then Sraffa has a short response to that. And so I have written on this, and David also, and so that's kind of how we're just jumping in. So I'll stop there, David. Do you want to explain what was your interest in this episode?
Sure. I think I can't really remember when I originally started thinking about it seriously, but the critical contribution to my thinking was something that Ludwig Lachmann, a student of Hayek, was actually pretty eclectic in his views, even though he was